Welcome to the Strong Enough Podcast, your relationship wellness podcast. I'm your host, Claudia. Today's guest is going to share with us how he spent 16 years in prison, wrongfully convicted. He was able to be exonerated and now helps others that are in similar positions as he was previously. Please help me in welcoming Jeff Deskovic. Jeff, thank you so much for being here with me this morning. I know you have such an amazing story to tell, and I'm really excited to share that with my listeners and viewers. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So thanks for having me as well. So I'm an advocate. I'm a founder of the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, which has freed 11 wrongfully convicted people and helped pass 3 laws aimed at preventing wrongful conviction. I'm an advisory board member of the coalition group It Could Happen to You, which helped pass an additional 5 laws. I'm an attorney. I have a master's degree as well. My thesis is on wrongful conviction, causes, and reform. I sit on the Global Advisory Council for Restorative Justice International. There's a documentary about me on Amazon Prime called Conviction. And I come to all of this work as a first-person advocate. So I spent 16 years in prison. I was arrested when I was 16. I was in prison from age 17 to 32 for a murder and rape, which I did not commit. And I ultimately was exonerated of through further DNA testing, and hence the motivation for my advocacy work.
Yeah, I want to say I was floored, when I heard about your story, but unfortunately, it's not as uncommon as we would like to think it is, to go through what you went through. And I was actually talking with some friends about it last night, and they are from another country. And I was explaining to them about false confessions. And they said, well, gosh, why would somebody do that? How does that happen? And we were kind of talking through that. But to me, it feels a lot like gaslighting almost, when you're in a relationship. So you're there, with the police, and I'm a former law enforcement officer, so I'm not knocking the police, but they're not all great.
Right.
You're there with them, and I think they start to convince you of things and try to get you to say things. So tell me a little bit about what that was like and how that felt for you in that moment when you're 16 years old.
Sure. So, I was driven out of county. So right there, in an unfamiliar environment. I'm 16 years old. My mother and grandmother had no idea of where I was. I'm there on a roost, first of all, because in the 6 weeks run up to the day of the false confession, the police were playing this cat and mouse game with me, where half the time they talked to me like I'm a suspect, and when they would push too hard and I'd become frightened and I'd want to get away from them, they would switch it up. And Jeff, as this junior detective helper theme was played up by them. The kids won't talk freely around us, they will around you. Mm-hmm. Let us know if you hear anything. Stop in from time to time. They would ask me opinion questions and congratulate me that my opinion was correct. Then the polygraphist himself was a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator. So he was dressed like a civilian. He never identified himself as law enforcement. He never read me my rights. So there was no attorney present. I wasn't given anything to eat the entire time I was there. They gave me a 4-page brochure on how the polygraph worked, but it had a lot of big words in it, which I didn't understand. But then I figured, I'm there to help the police. Mm-hmm. So what does it matter? Let's just get on with it.
Right.
And from there, they put me in a small room and gave me countless cups of coffee to get me nervous. And then he attached me to this polygraph machine. And then he launched into his third-degree tactics. So he raised his voice at me, invaded my personal space. He kept asking me the same questions over and over again. And he kept that up for 6.5 to 7 hours. It was particularly frightening to me, not just because of my age, but also I was not used to talking to adult males. My father had never been in my life in any aspect, and I had really limited contact with any of my uncles. So this was something new for me. And it kind of further threw me off balance by the whole good cop, bad cop routine. Mm-hmm. I began to look at the officer pretending to be my friend as a father figure. So at the end of the 6.5 to 7 hours, the polygraphist finally says, what do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the test result that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it. And that really shot my fear to the roof. And then the officer who had been pretending to be my friend, he came in the room and told me that the other officers were going to harm me, but that he had been holding them off, but could not do so any longer, that I had to help myself. Then he said, look, just tell them what they want to hear. You can go home. You're not going to be arrested. So being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, not thinking about the long term, just being concerned with my safety in the moment. I was in fear of my life. The fact that I didn't know where I was and no one else knew either loomed large in my mind. I was overwhelmed emotionally and psychologically, and the possibility of harm and this false promise. So the end result of it all was I made a decision to make up a story based on the information that they had given me in the course of the interrogation. By the time everything was said and done, I had collapsed on the floor into a fetal position, crying uncontrollably. And I was, in fact, arrested. I was charged with a murder and rape.
That's a lot. I mean, that's a lot to take in. I can't imagine being there. I do want to go through a couple of the things that you said, though, for the viewers and listeners, just to point out, from my perspective anyway, it sounds like the process as a whole, that 6 weeks was kind of like a grooming process. They're giving you the information based on your mood, or, today they're nice, now they're not nice. It's totally like an abusive relationship grooming scenario. And then I can't imagine being 16 and taking a polygraph, because I have taken multiple polygraphs, to be in law enforcement. And as an adult, and knowing I was going to take it and knowing, what it's about, I was terrified, because what I want people to know is these things are not scientific. The polygraphers will try to convince you of that. They will try to tell you that, these things know the truth and you can't trick it. And that's just a bunch of crap. So I don't know what your advice is, and as an attorney, my advice is never take a polygraph.
My advice would be the same thing. I would just fill in a little bit additional information, which is that it's not scientific, that a polygraph is often failed by frightened, innocent people. Intelligence officers are trained to beat the polygraph in case they're captured by the other side. And that there is a definite correlation between usage of the polygraph and coerced false confessions. Speaking of the issue of confession, just want to fill out also this, and you mentioned your conversation that you had with, some of your colleagues and your friends last night. I just wanted to share that coerced false confessions have caused wrongful convictions in 25% of the DNA-proven wrongful convictions. And that while adults have given coerced false confessions, particularly vulnerable populations would be youth and people with mental health issues.
Wow, that's frightening. I mean, that's a big number when you look at it that way. So you definitely have a lot of work to do, with your foundation. And also, congratulations on being an attorney now.
Thank you.
Very exciting. So I want to talk to you let's go back. You confess, falsely confess. Let's make that clear. You falsely confess. And you said based on information they had been feeding you, which is another tactic that is very common in false confessions, that you're using the information that you were given kind of as breadcrumbs along the way. What did you think was going to happen? I mean, you probably still felt like, okay, this is still all a mistake because I didn't do it. There's DNA, there's all these other things. So what was that like?
Well, it was exactly, you summarized it accurately. When I did confess, I didn't think that I was going to be arrested because I was still believing in the false promise. In fact, I actually didn't realize that I had been arrested until after I was brought back to the police station. But you're right that before the trial, the DNA result came in and it showed that semen found in the victim didn't match me. But the prosecutor got the medical examiner to commit fraud. So for our listeners, when the medical examiner does the autopsy, that's when the written and audio notes are written down. And so it was only 6 months after writing down the notes on his autopsy that once the DNA doesn't match me, that suddenly the polygraphist said, suddenly the medical examiner said, well, I remember that I forgot to document medical evidence showing that the victim had been promiscuous, which is what opened the door for the prosecutor to argue that, well, just because the DNA didn't match you doesn't mean you're innocent. She might have slept with yet another person before you murdered and raped her, which that theory doesn't make any sense because, firstly, you never proved that. And secondly, that would mean there would have been seminal fluid from at least two people. But then taking it a step further, he named another youth by name that he claimed had slept with the victim, but he never set the proper evidentiary foundation. So he never had him give a DNA sample. He never even called him as a witness. He just made the unsupported argument of the jury. So a couple of key items to add in connection with that. So one of them is that the victim's family was not coming to court. So they had no idea that her reputation was being trashed in the courtroom and in the furtherance of trying to wrongfully convict me. So that was one thing. Another thing was that we didn't know it at the time, but when the DNA didn't match me, the police went back into the field and they interviewed 17 witnesses who knew the victim in one capacity or another, and all of them told the police that she didn't have a boyfriend, there was no consensual sex, but the police did not document any of those witness interviews. And as a result of that, that information was never turned over to the defense. Speaking of the defense, my lawyer should have never represented me in the first place related to this issue because of a conflict of interest, which is that the other youth that the prosecutor was falsely saying had slept with the victim was represented by another member of that same public defender agency, and specifically by the lawyer who was supposed to be supervising him on my case. And so that conflict prevented the defense from asking him for a DNA sample. It prevented the defense from calling him as a witness. He literally asked no questions at all of the medical examiner. He rarely met with me. When he would meet with me and I tried to explain to him I was innocent, what happened in the interrogation room, he was always shutting me up. One time he told me he didn't care if I was guilty or innocent. He never explained to the jury what the DNA not matching me meant. He never used that to challenge the confession. Speaking of the confession, if you're defending a case where there's a false confession, you have to answer that confession, you have to explain it, you have to disprove the confession, bring it all together in your closing argument. But he didn't do any of that. Sometimes he argued to the jury that the confession never happened. Other times he argued that it happened, but it was coerced. And still other times he was arguing it happened, but it was false. So by this scattershot approach, he had to have lost all credibility. The interrogation was not videotaped or audio taped. There was no signed confession. It was just the officer's word for it. And as a result, when they came to court, they left a threat and false promise out of their story, and my lawyer would not allow me to testify to add those facts to the record.
Why do you think they locked in on you in the first place?
Well, I got on their radar because the police interviewed a lot of the students from the high school, and some of them told the police, well, they might want to talk to me. And that being because I was quiet and to myself. I kind of on the fringes of the society in the high school. Mm-hmm. Another thing was, this was really my first brush with death. I was a sentimental teenager, and I had an emotional reaction. And the police thought that, well, since you barely know the victim, and she was only in two of my classes as a freshman, one as a sophomore. I mean, we were not even really on a high-buy basis. They thought that was odd, that it was suspicious. But really, that doesn't make much sense because everyone reacts differently. But another thing is that murders were fairly rare in Peekskill, and so there was free mental health counseling set up throughout Peekskill for anyone that wanted it. I mean, that's how rare it was. That's how much it shook people up. So I was, by far not the only person impacted emotionally. And then they got psychological profile from the NYPD, which claimed to have the psychological characteristics of the actual perpetrator, and I had the misfortune of matching that. So I think all those factors, I think they just wanted to solve they just wanted to make it appear as if they solved the crime, and I was just the person that they picked.
Well, and it's like you said, murders didn't happen there very often. So, yeah, they don't want a murderer out on the loose. So, if they can wrap this up with a bow pretty quickly, it looks good for them and it makes the community feel better, despite the fact that it was not the right individual, at all. One of the things you mentioned that really annoys me, and I think we see it a lot I watch a lot of true crime and we see this very often, is he or she did not act correctly. And that's so frustrating to me, because like you said, everybody processes things very differently. And, I may have one reaction, you have another reaction. And it's always so frustrating to me when you hear, well, they weren't sad enough. They were too sad. They were angry, like whatever it is really frustrating to me. So you go through trial. What was that moment like when you heard guilty? Like, what did that do to you and to your family?
Yeah, so I was just sat there, just kind of stunned. I mean, like, did I hear that right? Did I miss the word not?
Mm-hmm.
So there was that, and it felt like beyond that, it simultaneously felt like I was in some sort of nightmarish alternative reality, because up to that point in time, I thought that only guilty people were convicted, and my mother and my grandmother were stunned as well. I mean, I didn't really know what was going to happen after that. On the day of the sentencing, I begged the judge to overturn the verdict because I was innocent, and I referenced the DNA to support my contention. And he actually told me on the record, maybe you are innocent. But instead of him overturning the conviction, which he could have done by reversing any number of rulings he made against me, he instead took the easy way out, which was to give me a 15 to life sentence, because I had been charged as an adult, tried as an adult, and I was sentenced as an adult. And as a result, I was sent to a men's maximum security prison.
At the age of 17, right?
Correct. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So what did all this do to your belief in trust of adults and authority figures?
Well, yeah, well, definitely. I'm skeptical of authority figures, and I regard them now as just like anybody else. They might be telling the truth, and they might not be. I'm very skeptical of them. So, yeah, I don't think that people suddenly gain morality or ethical simply because they they're in a particular profession.
And I think that's smart of you, for sure. I know that you had a pen pal in prison that I think was very beneficial for you to just kind of keep you going and keep you in a good mental and emotional space. So will you talk a little bit about that relationship, how that came about, and how meaningful that was for you?
Sure, that was extremely meaningful. So I placed an ad in a newspaper, the Sacramento Bee, which is in California, which is nowhere near New York. Mm-hmm. It's over 3,000 miles. And I came to put the ad there because I had placed the ad in a couple of more local papers, but the correctional officials saw that, and I actually got in trouble for doing that. They thought that I was soliciting, so I got in trouble for that. And so I figured when someone suggested Sacramento Bee, which is a small newspaper in Sacramento, California, I felt reasonably certain that the correctional officials would not, in fact, see the ad there. And so I put the ad in, I want to say maybe like in year like 14. And my thinking at that point was, look, I was desperate for some contact with the outside. So, I had very sporadic visits, and in the last 5-6 years, my mother would come maybe once every 6 months. And throughout my imprisonment, I had a couple of sets of aunts and uncles, and they would visit and disappear for 3 years and continue like that. My brother saw me 3 times in 16 years, not at all in the last decade. My grandmother used to come with my mother early on, where my mother would come once or twice a month, but then she passed away while I was in there, and the rest of my extended family never came to see me while I was there. So my point is, I'm setting the context for, well, why do I need pen pal for outside contact. Where's your family? That's the point of saying that. So my motivation to place the ad, though, was, look, I wanted contact with the outside. But in addition to that, I was hoping that at some point the conversation would turn to, well, what am I doing in there? And that would be when I'd get a chance to just explain I'm innocent, explain my case, and then maybe they would become a champion for me and help to build that bridge between me and the necessary legal services, as I had read it happened in other cases. So Scott answered this ad, and he wrote me. So he helped keep me going for the last 2 years, where I was really pretty much at the end of my rope. I mean, by that point, I had lost 7 appeals, so my appeals were over with. That took 11 years, and then I had wrote letters. I had written letters for the next 4 years, rarely getting a response, and then I went to the parole board, and because I maintained my innocence rather than expressing remorse and taking responsibility, I was turned down for parole. So I was openly asking my pen pal, and this is someone I didn't know from anywhere, look, should I just quit? Should I just give up? Should I just commit suicide and be done with this? So he was really an important factor.
So you went roughly 14 years without a pen pal. What was your support system in that time? I mean, because, you're saying your family was kind of sporadic and coming to see you. So how did you stay well, emotionally and mentally during that time?
Number of factors. Belief in God was one thing. Another thing was I thought I wasn't doing the life sentence. I thought I was just doing a year or two till the next appeal would be decided, which I was sure I was going to win because I was innocent and I still believed in the system. I used to go to the law library to learn the law, and that gave a sense of comfort and empowerment. I used to collect articles about other people who were exonerated, and I would use that as inspiration, and I would study that, like who helped them and what route did they take. Another thing was I engaged in this elaborate delusion. When I would play basketball or chess or ping pong, I would pretend like I was a professional player, and so was everyone else. But it really wasn't like kids fooling around on the playground. I mean, it was more that, I needed to get out of the prison for a couple of hours. And, similarly, in 1998, the prison Elmira Correctional Facility allowed us to purchase televisions. And so while my TV stayed off for the most part, because I was studying the law and writing letters and also reading nonfiction books. So from 1998 to 2006, I read like 3 or 4 nonfiction books a week. But while my TV stayed off, generally for those reasons, I did watch certain programs each week. And again, I did another delusion. And, I would pretend like when I'm watching a familiar program that I'm visiting with friends. I would cut out pictures of nature scenes and hang them up, and I would kind of travel there mentally a little bit. There was another wrongfully convicted prisoner there named Frank Sterling, who also was innocent. And we used to get together once every 6 weeks, and we would kind of keep each other going morale-wise, and we would brainstorm about what the next move was to make. Frank, by the way, just for context, Frank was exonerated through DNA testing a couple of years after me. So he did 18 years. So all of those factors kind of helped me keep going. But I did have to keep fighting off feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, thoughts of giving up, thinking about suicide. But really, I didn't have the luxury of losing it mentally, because I knew that nobody that I already knew was coming to my rescue. So if I was going to get out of there, I was going to have to find somebody that I didn't know already to help build that bridge. And to do that, I would have to hold it together mentally.
How did the relationship with your family members progress? I mean, I'm sure it's hard to visit somebody in prison,
Sure.
but you're their son, their relative, their grandson, so how did that transpire through the years, and do you have contact with them again now?
I do have contact with them now. I mean, it was initially awkward to visit with them because I had memories of them from when I was young, but I hadn't seen them, and I was a different person now. They were different as well. So it was awkward, and on their end of it, and then I did feel a little bit resentment that I didn't think I had in me, but as it would come out in certain visits, And what I notice is that with some of them, there is like a type of collective guilt in their mind, that they've shared with me. Some of them just in one-on-one situations. Hey, I'm sorry I didn't keep contact with you. I didn't support you morale-wise. Or, there were different times my mother made rounds and tried to get everybody to contribute a manageable amount of money so that I could hire a lawyer, and people always declined to participate in that. So that's something that, for them to deal with on their end. But through the years, I would say I've been able to rebuild things. Now we're kind of in a good place now.
How long did that take, to let that, I guess, resentment or anger go and to rebuild those relationships?
It's hard to really quantify. I think it's there isn't really like one generic answer that's true across the board for everybody. It varied from relationship to relationship. I have good relationship now with some of my cousins, but I'm really just interacting with them now. Right. So it's not like I made rounds to everyone. They were scattered throughout the country. So I think it's just some time passed by as I got to know them all, and just to the extent that in whatever year they happen to come in contact with me, would be how that's gone. But it didn't take as long for the people that I had an even more tangential relationship with from the beginning. I think it hurt more with the people that I had more contact with previously. Mm-hmm. That's really what took more.
So you spent, at the time that you went to prison, you spent basically that much of your life in prison. Right. And then, so your entire young adulthood, what was it like coming back into society, especially when so much had changed? Cell phones and laptops, just a lot of even just technological things. But how tough was that for you to come back into society?
Very difficult. Because as you said, the technology had passed you by: cell phone, GPS, internet, different ways of banking. Culture was different. Cities and towns looked different. Different people lived in those neighborhoods. So it did feel like I was kind of a fish out of water. It did feel like I was living in a parallel world that I didn't belong to. It was particularly difficult for me reintegrating because I was in prison from age 17 to 32, which is our formative years and lots of rites of passage. So I had never, when I was released, I had never previously lived on my own. I hadn't had a driver's license, and I had never went shopping, and I never had to write a check.
What was the most exciting thing that you got to do once you got out of prison?
From when I got out until now?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I guess it's maybe, I would say maybe it's a tie, one on the professional side. I'm an attorney now. Mm-hmm. And then just on the purely recreational side, just being able to travel to different countries.
Well, what's been your favorite place to travel to, would you say?
I would say Dominican Republic. The beaches are beautiful. The water is actually warm. The people are friendly, and if you've never tried any seafood while on a beach, you should. You're definitely missing something. And then the people come around. They dress the mariachis. They don't. They just want a little bit of money, not much, and then they sit there and they play. It's something to behold. So that's my favorite. That has been my favorite place to go to. But overall, maybe an overall activity that I like to do in terms of travel. I like to go to new places, and whether that's in an airplane or go to another state or another country, or even just like a different place in my city or elsewhere in the state. So just going to different places, different activity, trying new food. So if there's the more unusual something is on the menu, the more likely I am to order it. So those things.
How hard has it been for you to build and maintain relationships, and whether that's familial, friends, romantic, because it's a different process now. You know, when you were in prison, it's writing, or it's maybe seeing somebody very infrequently. So what is that like for you now in this different form and fashion?
It is a lot different. I mean, what I've found to be a challenge in terms of building friendships, and which I look at as I'm looking for activity partners, and in time some of those people become friends. So that's kind of another difference, how I don't just throw the word friend around like it's a piece of candy and we're going to give everyone one and everyone will feel great. That's to me, like a real friend is somebody that has no ulterior motives. They don't want anything from you, and you don't diminish in their vision just because you're out of their physical vision. So having said that, in terms of friendships, I think that the real challenge has been the number of things. So firstly, I would say that a lot of people have their primary and secondary relationships already built. Mm-hmm. So finding people that have room and space for me to be something more than just somebody on the peripheral, availability, living within a reasonable distance. I mean, it's great to know people in other states, but I'm not getting together with anybody in another state on a spontaneous basis, at least not with any kind of regularity. But also in terms of just having similar hobbies or interests. So I was released when I was 32, but I didn't feel 32. I felt 17. I mean, I'm 47 now, but I still feel like I'm maybe 25, 26, but not in this really great, I've got this new energy, I found the fountain of youth type way. It's more of I experience it more as kind of like a disconnect with the emotional, the mental versus the physical. So having people that, I mean, I still want to go on the bumper cars, or, it's still fun to experience nightlife. And I still want to, let's get a bunch of people together and let's play some pickup basketball, or let's play kickball, or let's play, two-hand touch football. And to have people be able to do those things with, that's really not what people my age want to do. And so now I have to try to go much younger, but then when I go too young, then that doesn't feel like I'm peer to peer anymore. And I don't think everybody has the maturity or the seriousness that, look, fun is fun within certain contexts, but if you're not careful, I mean, one thing can happen or another, and suddenly you may have some serious situation that's very adult-like. So, so that's kind of a challenge as well. Maybe the last thing I'll say is, I have been financially compensated, and, while that's great, and it does relieve the strain mentally, and, but at the same time, the people that I know are really either from my time in prison or when I was released for those first 5 years pre-compensation. So I'm in a different socioeconomic status now, and it gets old after a while, where unless Jeff pays for everything, nobody can afford to do anything. So that's an added element or complication to that. So that's really in terms of friendships. You asked me about that. In terms of the dating life, I mean, a number of challenges there. So, in the back of my mind, I don't want to have anybody ever say that I made them feel uncomfortable. So remember the fact that I was wrongfully incarcerated, not simply for a murder, but a murder with a rape, that was another aspect to it. I was in prison from age 17 to 32. So really the years you're supposed to be learning how to read body language and approach dynamics. It was a challenge to figure out how to even express if you are attracted, you do have some interest. It's difficult to even, how do you do that if you're in a beach or in a nightlife place, or you're happen to be shopping, and I ask for advice and it's easy, just go up and talk. No, I can't just go up and talk to somebody like that. I can't just, maybe you can do that. Okay. I have to see some kind of reciprocal interest. I need someone to have a little friendliness or start the conversation. Then I'm good. But lacking that, and so that is kind of been a challenge, but also the stigma. I was incarcerated for 16 years, wrongfully, yeah, but I was there for 16 years. So, how much of that rubbed off on you? Is it safe to be alone someplace with you? And then I have to be careful of, people with ulterior motives, and I have to think about my career as a lawyer, as an advocate, all I would need is one person, one time to say something, and then my career is gone, and then I'm no longer any good as an advocate to, further, freeing people and pushing the policy changes and broader justice reform. I really look at myself as a tool in the struggle, and in some quarters, I'm considered to have more credibility than somebody else who's formerly incarcerated but is on parole. I mean, they're perceived as, they have an axe to grind, but I didn't. But I don't, so I use that to our advantage. I mean, whatever it takes to get somebody's ear to push the legit message, which, somebody else could be just as valid as me, but if they're not seeing the same light. So I have to keep that in mind also. And it is kind of a struggle sometimes when just trying to set boundaries between the balance between, if I was to have a date schedule in a week and ahead of time, but then I suddenly get an unexpected media opportunity, or there's a really important meeting with some elected officials, but it's in another state. It's in Pennsylvania or it's in California. So I can't go and then still come back in time. So that's being able to choose and decide what to do is not is really not an easy thing either.
I do want to point out something that you mentioned that I thought was super cool, and that was activity partners, that you don't throw that friend label out there so easily. And I really want our listeners and viewers to hear that, because a lot of them do have various relationship struggles and are often looking for validation, love, connection, and grab at it wherever they can because that feels right. So I appreciate the fact, that you don't do that, especially as someone who might be in a position where it's like, gosh, I spent all this time in a place I didn't want to be. Now I'm here. Like, I want all the friends I could possibly have. But, you're very cognizant of not doing that and honoring yourself with only the people that deserve your time and effort. So how did you get to that place of just having that awareness and that love for yourself to say, you know what, I'm not friends with everybody. I'm going to give the people that deserve it my time and love and attention?
I think really just from being in prison, where again, for many intents and purposes, just kind of by myself. And so I quickly learned that hard lesson. So I would say that's where I got that from. But being able to ferret out people's motivations, and, somebody calls me up and they ask me how I'm doing, and the very next thing they want one thing or another, then I learned in time, well, they really don't care how I'm doing. They called me up for the next question that they asked, but it took time to develop that. And that's not an easy thing either, when it comes to just separating yourself, from people. But if someone just wants something all the time and it's not then it's better to just be by yourself, even though no one wants solitude. That's one of the things I was really looking forward to when I was in prison, daydreaming about, being free. I mean, I'm a social person, I'm a people person. And so looking forward to authentic communication and just connecting and having conversation and people to do things with. But that has to be with the right people. And, it wasn't easy to just stop, but I felt better each time I did it. I might have had a little bit of regret, and then I started questioning myself, and did I really interpret that right? Or did I make the mistake, or did they, but I think a little bit about that. And then I come to my conclusion, and then I just have to be happy with that. And then I just set about, try to put a plan in place to try to build out my social life again, but going slowly. And as I say, just activity partners, and some just become friends. And maybe the other thing I'll share also, what I use, which, could be a tip to people listening, is I think it's really important for just to surround yourself with, people who are doing real positive, people that are not positive, or who are really not trying to advance themselves. I mean, people that are just satisfied with mediocrity, or, just being a faceless person as amongst the whole sea of other people, everybody just kind of interchangeable. I aspire to a lot. So I like to be around people that want a lot for themselves, that really want to make a difference, that are committed to self-improvement. I feel like those are the people really that I should surround myself with. And, I really appreciate when, people are able to just be straight and direct. I mean, I want to take constructive criticism on anything so that I can improve. And, and it's hard, a lot of people don't talk straight to each other. They just kind of beat around the bush and worried if they're going to offend you and this. And I don't have time for that. I want people to just be direct and straight with me. And, I'm going to be the same way. I mean, I'm not going to be mean about it, but I'm also going to give you the benefit of my honest opinion. And if somebody was to get upset with that and they don't want to deal with me anymore, then that's just a price I pay in order to stay true to myself. And I'm willing to pay that.
I love that. And I think that is important for people to hear, is being true to yourself, because that is hard sometimes, especially for people pleasers, people that just want to make sure everybody else is happy and they lose themselves in that process.
Sure. And I also think about, I'm sorry, I just want to mention one other related point, which is, that I also learned too that, the person's image or my image is also somewhat shaped by the people around me. So again, I'm an advocate, I'm an attorney, I'm doing really important work for the benefit of other people. So how would that look if I was around somebody else that's getting high, or somebody they're getting drunk all the time, or every other word out of someone's mouth is something foul, so how would, or this, whoever's with me is just around a bunch of other bad people. So I think that's also part of that.
And I think that's so true. I've heard before they say, whoever they are, that, you're the sum of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. So I think that's a great point that you made. Absolutely. So I know a lot of people, when you go through a traumatic experience, and it's not really fair to call what you went through a traumatic experience because it's so much more than that. But when people go through that, a lot of times when they get to the other side, they want to just move on. They want to put that in their rearview mirror and get away from it. You have taken another approach where you have pretty much now dedicated your life to helping other people experiencing a similar circumstance. So why did you make that decision versus saying, you know what, I spent my time, I got out, I'm grateful to be here, but I got to let all this go. So tell me about making that decision to help others.
Well, like many things I've decided, and many things in life, is more than one thing that's true. There's, really good, I think that really good conclusions can be supported by multiple lines of reasoning that's true at the same time. So I prefaced my answer that way to now say this. So firstly, I can't forget about the people that I've metaphorically left behind. Per the National Registry of Exoneration, 2,805 people been exonerated from 1989 forward. 19 people I did time with were exonerated either before me or after me. So my point is that I know that wrongful conviction is not as infrequent as what we would like to believe. It's a lot more frequent than that. Hence, part of my line of reasoning. But another aspect of it is that I feel like since I was exonerated, I do have now more of a platform, to, gain some ears, and I think it would really be a waste of that to not use the voice to then, communicate, try to bring about change. Another thing was, while I was in prison, when I would read about other people who were exonerated, they would always get this initial 5-minute hit of fame, and then they would then the media would suddenly go quiet. And it would always used to frustrate me when I would say, well, why aren't you using that time to try to open this up for the rest of us? Why don't you try to keep the media coverage going? And so when I unexpectedly found myself in this position, I kind of drafted myself, and I thought, well, you were critical of other people. Why don't let's see what you do now. Why don't you show them, how it's done? So that's that was another aspect of it. Another thing is that I feel like I've had educational opportunities that other people haven't had. in terms of getting the GED while I was in prison, the associates, the year to the bachelor's. Not everybody is as intentional. Everyone makes those decisions to, minimize the loss they're experiencing, and then getting the scholarship from Mercy College to finish the bachelor's on the outside, and getting the master's, and ultimately getting the law degree and becoming an attorney. So I feel a deep moral responsibility on that, but I do know that my mission in life is to free people and do the policy work and the broader justice reform. And so I have that sense of purpose. I have that inner peace about me as a result of that. So that's another motivating factor.
Absolutely. Did you feel that motivation or that passion while you were still in prison, or were you kind of just, and I don't want this to, not in a selfish way, but were you just focused on yourself? Like, I've got to take care of me right now. I've got to get myself out before I can help anyone else.
It was a lot of the latter, but along the way, though, I mean, look, I wouldn't say that I was a jailhouse lawyer getting other people out of prison the way some other people have. But that having been said, though, I did give tips and advice along the way at times when I was asked for that. So I just did that a little bit in moderation.
Do you maintain any relationships with people that you met in prison that are still there?
I did for a while, and then the people that I knew that I knew in prison were released, and of the people that were released, I maintain ties with a few of those now. It's kind of an interesting dynamic because I was a different person in prison than I was not this civil rights advocate. I was not an attorney. I wasn't this quasi-public figure. I was just somebody who just kind of kept my head down, and I didn't try to be popular. And, I just did surface level dealing, keeping people at a couple of arm's length. Within that, I had a little friendliness, but I had everyone at a distance. And now I am those things now, so I'm kind of a different person now, and they're a different person on the outside. So I might think of, well, they were somebody that was more prominent in the society while I was incarcerated, and now we've completely switched positions. Mm-hmm. Not only am I what you were, but I'm out here. I'm much more than what you were while you were in there. Mm-hmm. So it is kind of an interesting. It is a kind of an interesting dynamic, and other people being, just this is a different world out here also.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about some relationship advice that you would hand out based on just your experience as a whole. What's something that you could say to people to better their relationships in general?
I would say I think it's really I don't really believe in the idea of opposites attract, whether on a friendship or in a romantic relationship. I mean, I guess there's some allure to that on maybe if that's true in one or two areas, but I believe that globally you have to have shared interests. So there should be maybe 4 or 5 different things you have in common so that you can change genres of activities. You can change settings even. Some people, if you can't bring somebody to multiple different places that you normally frequent, then I don't think that that's somebody that you should be serious with, even on a really close friend or even on a romantic relationship. I mean, it doesn't really work if somebody tries to do something just to make another person happy. That's not something that they truly like, because while they might do that once or twice, or you might do that once or twice, that's not sustainable. And eventually somebody is going to start to feel resentful, and it's ultimately not going to work out. So I would say that that's a tip. And another tip I would give is that anybody that's really true to you, they're not going to try to get you to change an essential part of you. Like if you're a painter, you're an artist, you're a drawer, you shouldn't have to give that up. But whatever's essential part of you, you should not have to give that up for somebody else. And anyone that's asking you to, that's really not a real person. That's not the right fit.
I love that. And I think it's also having the confidence to recognize that. Would you agree with that?
100%. Yes. Yes, I would. Yeah, I definitely would recognize that. And I think another thing is that, good communication, regular communication, open communication is very important. So if you for your primary relationships, the people that you hold close to you, again, in whatever relationship paradigm we're talking about, if you have to hold your peace on a regular basis, otherwise there's going to be, and that's the only way for there to be peace for you to get along, then that's a big red flag that, that something's not right. You should be able to share really anything that bothers you, whatever you want to talk about, and if the other person is not having in mind the same thing that you're having in mind, which is, look, the most important thing here is the relationship we have with each other. So all these other things, whatever they are, that's not, I'm going to talk about whatever I need to talk about, and I shouldn't feel like the relationship is threatened or in some kind of danger if I do, because if I do, then again, that's kind of like a tacit admission inwardly, that this is not the right person for you. That's not the right fit. Maybe another tip I'll give is, if you should know what your deal breakers are, and stick to them. Okay, they're no reclamation projects. Okay, you're not fixing anybody. Nobody is changing anything. If someone's perfect except for this. Well, if this is this deal breaker, you need to move on, because they're not going to give it up. They're not going to change who they are for you.
That is huge. I'm so glad you said that, because so many people do let this or that go. And yes, if it's a little thing, that's okay. But I think really taking the time to look at our deal breakers and recognize what they are and really sticking to that is so key to our long-term happiness and relationship success, for sure.
I think timing is important also. Like, I don't think that everything that happens needs to be spoken about right then and there immediately. Sometimes waiting for another time where there aren't people around, or the moment is everyone's calmed down, or the moment is different. But I think, and you're right also, a different point than that is that, you have to pick your battles also. Not everything is worth drawing a line in the sand, but at a later point, you should be able to say, may I say something to you without you getting upset? I don't want to fight about it. I just want to share something that bothers me a little bit that I would like to not have happen again. Boom, boom, oh, okay, wow, I didn't realize that, or I didn't know you were looking at that like that, so I won't do that anymore. That should be the communication. But again, if there's no way at all to bring something up at all, then, maybe that's a narcissistic person. Maybe you need to move on.
So once again, communication is key.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, I don't want to take up much more of your time, but I do want to hear what is next for Jeff.
Yeah, so I have entered some of the, so since becoming an attorney, I have entered some of the 10 active cases that we're working on now. I have entered a few of those as an attorney, and so I am hoping to realize the dream of exonerating others as an attorney. I'm looking forward to building my profile and helping to pass legislation beyond just in New York. I mean, I engaged in some policy campaigns in Pennsylvania and California. Would eventually like to have a chapter of the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation to be in each state and ultimately each country. I really look at wrongful conviction as a worldwide problem, not just simply a U.S. problem. And that'll be when we're able to obtain the public support that we need for that. We do have a Patreon page, people that are willing to be recurring monthly donors. So imagine if 25,000 people were able to contribute $3 or $5 a month on a recurring basis in order to help us free people and then do the policy changes. But beyond that, I think that at some point I'm hoping to have a book deal, have a movie deal. There's going to be a bigger version of Conviction that's an hour and a half that'll come out sometime this year. And maybe looking down the road 6-7 years from now, maybe I'll make the jump from doing policy work as an advocate in the nonprofit sector to running for office, to be able to pull the levers to, stretch the envelope a little bit for a good cause, right? So many times it's stretching it for a bad cause, and I want the other thing, and it really is just to serve the people. And I feel like politicians too often they do things. They only do things when it's popular or just connected with votes or getting votes, not because it's the right thing. And remember that holding office, you're supposed to be a servant of the people. You're not supposed to be a permanent ruling class. And it's not the idea of holding position just for the sake of holding it. You're supposed to do something good with it when you get the chance. And if that means that you sacrifice your career because doing the right thing is not popular at the moment, and that means that maybe you won't get reelected, well, stay true to yourself and your values. And if that's all that was meant for you, then you put your stamp on it, and you could still look in the mirror. And I think that few people are looking at things that way of either political party. And, I really hate to see, the polarization that, goes on now. As a country, we really don't frequently debate ideas anymore, and people divide over political affiliation and views on people that don't even know that most of us exist. But families separate, friendships end. I just really think that that's really unhealthy. And if I was to just give a generic formula, overcoming adversity, I would say have a goal. Have a goal. Have a realistic plan that you could look at 3 or 4 different ways, and you should have a chance of working. Be flexible. Remember, the goal is the goal. The plan's not the goal. And work really hard, and no reasons why you can't accomplish something. Right? No excuses. There might be reasons why it's more difficult, why there's particular challenges, but nothing that can't be overcome. And when you are ready to quit, that might be the key moment where you're on the verge of a breakthrough. But because you quit, it won't happen. So keep going anyway, even when you can't, just to see what happens on the other side. And when you do make it, reach back and help similarly situated people, and do some work on the preventative side. And if you can do that, then you'll make your suffering count for something. It'll be healing, cathartic, and make the world a little bit better. And I know that message is universal. That's beyond wrongful imprisonment. So I see that as applying, say, to somebody who survived domestic abuse, a sexual assault victim, someone homeless, debilitating illness, you face discrimination, racism. And I've seen people in some of those walks of life that are now doing advocacy work. So we need more people that when they overcome, they don't forget that they do reach back and help people and do some work on the preventative side.
You are so amazing. You're such a light, and I so appreciate that. Where can people find you if they just want to see what you're doing, see what's going on, reach out? Where can people find you?
Well, they can definitely find me on social media. So I have a public figure page on Facebook. I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn. People can go to my website, www.deskovic.org. There's a web form that people can email me there. But in terms of what's going on, I think the better place would be the social media. So, I have interviews there on events that are coming up, and media appearances I've already made. But I also share quite a bit of articles on wrongful conviction and justice reform in general. So if you're looking just to learn more about that whole field, that certainly is a way to do it. And I want to once again encourage people, take a look. If you liked what you heard today, you'd like to see a little bit more, I do have the documentary short out on Amazon Prime, which is called Conviction. And so if you like it, please leave a comment in the comment section on Amazon. It's all towards proof of concept, so we have an even better time getting the largest possible platform when the bigger version comes out.
Well, I will definitely leave a comment because it is amazing. So, Jeff, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for sharing your story. And thank you so much for sharing all the relationship and life advice that you gave, because I do think, the things you said really are applicable to everyone in all different scenarios. So I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for sharing your platform with me.
I really hope you guys enjoyed my conversation with Jeff as much as I did. You know, I really believe his positive outlook and his optimism are what have carried him through and made him the amazing person that he is. He also shared some great relationship and life advice. So remember, until next week, you are strong enough and you are worth it.